TypeScript. That's probably not what you expected me to make a video about. I usually talk about PHP, and TypeScript is almost entirely the opposite of that. Now, if you've seen my recent videos about PHP and its type system and generics, you might be able to guess where this is going, but I'm going to keep it a little bit vague for now. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about TypeScript, why it's such a unique language, why it's so popular, and what we can learn from it, regardless of what programming language we're using. So, let's talk about that. JavaScript was, I would say, a mess. It still is to some degree. There have been a lot of improvements in the past decade, but it's still quite a strange language. There is this in-depth series called You Don't Know JS by Kyle Simpson, where he writes about all the inner workings of JavaScript. You can find a link in the description. Now, if you read it, you'll understand JavaScript is a strange language. Lots of weird inconsistencies at its core, a very strange and unique way of object modeling and classes, and a bunch of quirks that you might not expect. But it's the only language that runs in the browser. Okay, technically there's WebAssembly as well, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Because JavaScript was the only available option for years, it had no other future, despite its many quirks, than to become as popular as it is today. Now, there's this talk by Gary Bernhardt called The Birth and Death of JavaScript. It's almost 10 years old. And in it, he tries to predict the future of JavaScript. And sometimes it might seem a little far-fetched even today, but at the very end, he makes a very accurate statement. He says that JavaScript had to be bad. Very bad. And on top of that, it had to be the only option available for it to grow as popular as it is today. If there were 10 other client-side languages available, no single one would have grown as much as JavaScript did. And if JavaScript wasn't as bad as it was, people wouldn't have been compelled to create better alternatives on top of it. Do you remember the days of CoffeeScript? Or maybe Asm.js? The days when people started experimenting with compiling a language to another language, to the only language that was available in your browser, JavaScript. Now, Asm.js was actually very impressive back in the day when Epic Games and Mozilla managed to run Unreal Engine 3 in the browser. It was a blob of C code compiled to a very optimized form of JavaScript, Asm.js. A couple of years later now, and we have WebAssembly and tons of languages now compiled to it, so that they can run in the browser. But the original idea was so mind-blowing and only possible because JavaScript honestly sucked, and it was the only option available. And then there's CoffeeScript and TypeScript. Unlike Asm.js, these languages are not focused on being able to run anything in the browser, but to highly optimize the developer experience of any JavaScript programmer. They had compilation steps, so a little bit of overhead, but they allowed us to write code that looked like JavaScript with tons of improvements, which would compile to vanilla.js so that your browser could run it. Now, CoffeeScript is essentially dead at this point, but TypeScript is still growing in popularity. But it has no extra features available at runtime because it's all vanilla.js in the end. So why did it become so popular? 2 words: static analysis. Now, if you've watched my previous videos on generics in PHP, you now know where I'm going with this. The ability for programs, IDEs, static analyzers, compilers to understand your code without running it. It's incredibly powerful. Being able to get insights into your code when you're writing it. An IDE can tell you what's wrong before you've run that code. Compilers can detect potential bugs, which often are actual bugs, without any debugging. That's the power of static analysis, and that's what made TypeScript immensely popular. In the end, it saves developers lots of time and makes programming more fun. And sure, it requires an extra compilation step to transform TypeScript code to vanilla.js. And during that compilation time, all kinds of static type checking is performed without running your code. But even with that overhead, it still saves tons of time in the end. And the idea has proven itself. It's genius. TypeScript is still compatible with JavaScript, but it doesn't have to worry about backwards compatibility on the same level. It has much more freedom to add new features, and it isn't constrained by a web browser's runtime. But it's not an easy undertaking. Microsoft started developing TypeScript in 2010, and released the first version only after 2 years in 2012. IDE support is absolutely required for such an idea to work. You need talented language and compiler designers. This isn't something any programmer can do in 2 weeks in their garage. And here I am, a PHP developer, looking at this from a distance. Here's a community, the JavaScript community, that's absolutely used to an interpreted language with the most lenient type system you've ever seen. And suddenly they start embracing a language that needs a dedicated build step with a very strict type system. And from my point of view, that's quite a big leap. People don't like adding extra build steps when they're used to making a change, refreshing the web page, and it's there. Simple. A compilation step makes that process more difficult. When talking about simplicity, I've always found there to be many similarities between the mindset of PHP and JavaScript. They have grown into something that wasn't expected from them when they were created, which you notice throughout both languages with that quirkiness and strange behaviors. But they are still very popular to this day. Now, granted, PHP doesn't have a monopoly on server-side programming like JavaScript does on the client side, but maybe that only speaks in its favor. Despite many alternatives, it's still a heavily used programming language for the web. Many data sources say it's still the most used language for the web today. They both have a rather weak type system at their core, and both are moving away from it. JavaScript with a superset, TypeScript, and PHP with a more built-in optional type checker, although it's not nearly as strict and robust as in JavaScript. Now, I believe in statically typed languages for projects at a certain scale, but I'm also convinced about the power of the PHP ecosystem. And that's something I don't want to leave behind. So we've seen this debate between strict and static typing versus weak and dynamic typing in the PHP community. And honestly, there isn't any consensus on the matter yet. And so I wonder, where are we going with all of this? Is a superset of PHP, like TypeScript, the better solution? Is it something the community needs and is ready for? It definitely wasn't the obvious path for JavaScript 15 years ago. On the other hand, it's quite an undertaking, and I highly doubt it's doable without the effort and help of large companies. I don't know. These are the things I think about when lying awake in the middle of the night when my son wakes me up. I think there's potential for something more, and I think TypeScript is the perfect example of what's possible when a community embraces a new mindset, even though it might differ from what we have been used to up until that point. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Leave a like, subscribe. You know what to do. Until next time.